If you've ever grown a tomato plant that gave you tons of leafy growth and almost no fruit, or watched your tomatoes crack open right before they were ready to pick, this video fixes that. We're covering the entire tomato journey, start to finish. Starting seeds indoors, moving them outside, feeding them properly at every stage, fixing the most common problems before they ruin your harvest, and knowing exactly when to pick. No skipped steps. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what a tomato plant needs at every single stage, and exactly what to do when something goes wrong. Here's what's coming. First, choosing the right tomato for what you actually want to grow. Then starting your seeds indoors the right way. Transplanting them outside without shocking the plant. Staking and supporting your plant so they don't collapse under their own fruit. And feeding through each growth stage, because tomatoes need different things at different times. We'll go through the most common problems people run into and exactly how to fix each one. And finally, how to know precisely when to harvest and how to store what you pick. Let's get started. Before you even plant a single seed, it's worth taking a minute to choose the right tomato for what you actually want. This single decision affects almost everything else in this video, so it's worth getting right from the start. Tomatoes generally fall into two growth habits, determinate and indeterminate. Determinate varieties grow to a set, compact size and tend to produce most of their fruit within a fairly short window, which makes them a great choice if you want a big harvest all at once, for canning or making sauce, or if you have limited space. Indeterminate varieties keep growing and producing fruit continuously until frost kills the plant, which is what most people picture when they imagine a backyard tomato plant. And they're the better choice if you want a steady trickle of fresh tomatoes all summer long rather than one big harvest. Beyond growth habit, there's also the question of what you're actually going to do with the fruit. Slicing tomatoes, the classic round, juicy type, are what you want for sandwiches and salads. Paste tomatoes have denser flesh and fewer seeds, and they are what you want if you're planning to make your own sauce, salsa, or canned tomatoes. Cherry and grape tomatoes are smaller, sweeter, and prolific, great for snacking and salads, and often more forgiving for beginners since they tend to be less fussy overall. You'll also see heirloom and hybrid varieties. Heirlooms are older, open-pollinated varieties passed down over generations, often prized for exceptional flavor, but they tend to be more susceptible to disease and less uniform in appearance. Hybrids are bred specifically for traits like disease resistance, productivity, and consistency, which makes them a more forgiving choice if you're newer to growing or dealing with a garden that's had disease problems in the past. Neither is objectively better. It depends on what you're optimizing for: maximum flavor and tradition, or reliability and resistance. If you've struggled with a specific disease before, this is also where you can get ahead of the problem. Many seed packets and plant tags list disease resistance directly, often using letter codes like V, F, N, or T, standing for resistance to verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, nematodes, and tobacco mosaic virus. If your garden has had issues with any of these before, choosing a resistant variety from the start can save you a lot of trouble later, which we'll talk about more in the problem section. Now let's start at the very beginning, the seed. Tomatoes are a warm season crop, which means timing matters a lot here. You want to start your seeds indoors about 6 to 8 weeks before your area's last expected frost date. If you don't know your last frost date, a quick search for your zip code and last frost date will give you a solid answer. Starting too early means your plants get leggy and stressed waiting for warm weather. Starting too late means a shorter growing season and a smaller harvest. For containers, small seed starting trays or even repurposed yogurt cups with drainage holes poked in the bottom work perfectly fine. You don't need anything fancy here. Fill them with a seed starting mix, not regular garden soil, and not even regular potting soil. Seed starting mix is lighter and finer, which makes it much easier for a tiny tomato seedling to push through. Plant your seeds about 1/4 inch deep. Tomato seeds are small, so it's easy to bury them too deep by accident. 1/4 inch is genuinely all you need. Cover lightly, water gently so you don't displace the seeds, and keep the soil consistently moist but never soggy. Here's the part most people get wrong: temperature. Tomato seeds germinate best between 70 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If your house runs cooler than that, especially in early spring, your seeds might take 2 to 3 weeks to sprout instead of the usual 5 to 10 days, or they might not sprout reliably at all. A seedling heat mat underneath your trays solves this completely, and it's a worthwhile investment if you're starting tomatoes indoors every year. Once your seedlings sprout, light becomes the single most important factor. A windowsill is usually not enough light, even a south-facing one. Without strong, direct light, seedlings stretch upward searching for more. That's what creates the tall, thin, weak, leggy seedlings that flop over and struggle once you move them outside. A simple grow light, positioned just a couple of inches above the seedlings and raised as they grow, makes an enormous difference. Run it for about 14 to 16 hours a day. When your seedlings get their first set of true leaves, meaning the second set of leaves that emerges, which actually look like proper tomato leaves rather than the small rounded first leaves, that's your signal it's time to start thinking about transplanting them into bigger individual pots if they're still in small trays. Giving the roots more room at this stage builds a stronger plant before it ever goes outside. One more thing worth doing here. Lightly run your hand over your seedlings once a day, or point a small fan at them for a few hours daily. This sounds strange, but it mimics the effect of wind, which encourages the stem to grow thicker and stronger, a process called thigmomorphogenesis. Plants that get this light physical stress indoors transition to outdoor wind and weather far better than ones that never experienced any resistance at all. Before your tomato seedlings ever go into the ground, they need to go through something called hardening off. This is one of the most skipped steps, and skipping it is one of the most common reasons new transplants get damaged or die within days of being moved outside. Hardening off means gradually introducing your indoor-grown seedlings to outdoor conditions. Sun, wind, temperature swings, over about 7 to 10 days. Start with just an hour or two outside in a shaded, sheltered spot on day 1. Each day, increase the time and the sun exposure a little. By the end of the week, your seedlings should be able to handle a full day outside, including a few hours of direct sun. Skip this process, and a plant that looked perfectly healthy indoors can get sunburned, wind damaged, or simply collapse from shock within 24 hours of being transplanted directly into the ground. Once your plants are hardened off, you'll want to wait until nighttime temperatures are reliably staying above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomatoes are tropical in origin, and they genuinely stop growing, sometimes even get damaged, below that. Here's a detail that separates a strong tomato plant from a mediocre one: how deep you plant it. Unlike most plants, tomatoes can grow roots along their buried stem. When you transplant, strip off the lower set of leaves and bury the stem deeper than it was growing in the pot. Sometimes up to 2/3 of the plant can go underground. Every part of that buried stem will grow new roots, giving you a much larger, more stable root system than if you just planted it at the same depth it was growing before. Spacing matters more than people think. Give each tomato plant at least 2 to 3 feet of space in every direction. It's tempting to plant closer together to fit more in, but crowded tomato plants get poor airflow, which is one of the biggest contributors to fungal disease later in the season. Crowding now creates problems in July. Choose a planting site that gets at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight a day. Less than that, and you'll get a plant that survives but produces a disappointing amount of fruit. After transplanting, water deeply and immediately. Not a light sprinkle, a deep soak that reaches several inches down, encouraging the roots to grow downward rather than staying shallow near the surface, where they'll dry out fast in summer heat. Tomato plants get heavy. Once fruit starts forming, an unsupported plant will sprawl on the ground, and tomatoes touching the soil are far more likely to rot, get eaten by pests, or pick up soil-borne disease. There are 3 common support methods, and which one you choose depends on the type of tomato you're growing. Staking works well for determinate varieties. Those are the more compact types that grow to a set size and produce most of their fruit around the same time. A simple wooden or metal stake driven into the ground next to the plant, with the main stem loosely tied to it as it grows, is often enough. Caging is the most common method for indeterminate varieties, the larger types that keep growing and producing fruit all season long. A sturdy cage, ideally one rated for tomatoes specifically rather than the thin decorative cages sold for flowers, gives the plant structure on all sides as it grows. Trellising, where you train the plant up a string or a flat support structure, works extremely well for indeterminate types in particular, and it makes harvesting easier later since the fruit is more visible and accessible. Whichever method you choose, the key is putting it in place at planting time, or shortly after, not waiting until the plant is already sprawling. Trying to retrofit support onto a tomato plant that's already fallen over often damages the stem and stresses the plant. As your plant grows, you'll also want to do some basic pruning, especially on indeterminate varieties. Look for suckers, small shoots that grow in the joint between the main stem and a branch. Removing the lower suckers, especially early in the season, redirects the plant's energy into producing fruit rather than excess foliage. You don't need to remove every single sucker obsessively, but keeping the bottom of the plant relatively clear of them helps a lot. We're getting into exactly what your tomato plant needs to eat at each stage of its life, and then the part most people are watching for, the most common tomato problems, and the exact fix for each one. Tomatoes have different nutritional needs depending on what stage of growth they are in, and feeding them the same thing the entire season is one of the quiet reasons people get disappointing harvests. Early on, from transplanting through the start of flowering, your plant needs a more balanced feed, with a slight emphasis on phosphorus, which supports root development and the beginning of flower formation. Too much nitrogen during this stage is a common mistake. Nitrogen drives leafy green growth, and if you overdo it early, you get a big, lush, healthy-looking plant that's surprisingly slow to actually flower and fruit. Once your plant starts flowering and setting fruit, its needs shift. This is when potassium becomes especially important, since potassium supports fruit development and overall plant health during the demanding process of actually producing tomatoes. Many tomato-specific fertilizers are formulated with this shift in mind, with a lower nitrogen number and higher potassium number on the label compared to an all-purpose feed. Calcium deserves a specific mention here, because a calcium-related problem is one of the most common things that goes wrong with tomatoes. We'll cover the exact symptom and fix for that shortly. Most garden soil actually has enough calcium already. The real issue is usually about whether the plant can access and move it consistently, which comes down to watering more than fertilizing. We'll get into that in a moment. As a simple rule of thumb, feed every 2 to 3 weeks once your plants are established, following the product instructions for your specific fertilizer, and pay attention to your plant's appearance. Dark green, lush leaves with little fruit suggests too much nitrogen. Pale, yellowing leaves suggest the plant may need more feeding overall. Your plant is generally telling you what it needs if you know what to look for, which leads directly into the next section. Watering deserves equal attention here, because it interacts directly with feeding. Tomatoes do best with deep, consistent watering. Aim for about 1 to 2 inches of water per week, delivered in fewer, deeper sessions rather than frequent shallow sprinkles. Inconsistent watering, where the soil dries out completely and then gets soaked, is one of the biggest hidden causes of several common tomato problems, which we're about to cover. Quick interesting detour before we get into troubleshooting. Did you know not every tomato is bred for the same job? The tomatoes used for ketchup and canned sauce are actually a completely different style of tomato than the ones you'd slice for a sandwich. They're called paste tomatoes, and they are bred to have less water, fewer seeds, and more dense flesh, which is exactly what you want when you're cooking something down into a thick sauce. And here's the part that surprises people. Cooked tomato products like sauce and ketchup actually contain more absorbable lycopene. That's the antioxidant tomatoes are known for than a raw, fresh tomato does. The heat from cooking breaks down the plant cell walls and makes it nutrient easier for your body to actually use. So if you're growing a paste-style variety specifically to make your own sauce this year, you're not just doing it for flavor, you're getting more out of it nutritionally too. Okay, back to the garden. Let's talk about what can actually go wrong with your tomato plants, and exactly how to fix each one. This is the section most people are specifically searching for. So let's go through this thoroughly, covering the issues that show up most often, in the order you're most likely to actually encounter them through the season. Transplant stress versus real disease. Right after you move your seedlings outside, you might see some wilting or drooping, especially in the afternoon heat. Before you panic and assume disease, know this: a small amount of wilting in the first few days after transplanting is completely normal. The roots haven't fully established yet, and the plant is adjusting. Give it a few days and consistent watering before assuming something is seriously wrong. Blossom end rot. This is the dark, sunken, leathery patch that forms at the bottom of the fruit while the rest of the tomato looks completely fine. Most advice online blames calcium deficiency and tells you to add eggshells or calcium spray. In most cases, that's not actually the root issue. Garden soil usually already has enough calcium. The real problem is almost always inconsistent watering. Calcium only moves through a plant along with water that's actively flowing. So when your watering swings between bone dry and soaked, the plant can't transport calcium fast enough to keep up with the growing fruit. The fix is steady, even watering, not necessarily more water, just more consistent timing. Mulching around the base of the plant helps a lot here, since it slows down how quickly the soil dries out. Splitting or cracking fruit. This usually happens when a dry spell is suddenly followed by heavy rain or watering. The fruit absorbs water faster than the skin can stretch to accommodate it, and it splits, sometimes radiating outward from the top in cracks, sometimes in smaller surface cracks. Consistent watering is again the fix, along with harvesting fruit that's already showing early signs of cracking before it gets wise, rather than waiting for full ripeness. Cat facing. This is when a tomato comes out strangely misshapen, with deep crevices, scarring, or holes near the blossom end. It looks almost deformed compared to a normal round tomato. It's most common on the very first fruit clusters of large beefsteak-type varieties, and it's caused by exposure to cool temperatures, generally below 50 degrees, right around the time the flower was forming. It's not a disease and it's not dangerous to eat. It's purely cosmetic, caused by weather timing you can't control after the fact. The fruit is perfectly fine to eat. It just won't look picture perfect. Sun scald. If you see a tomato with a pale, almost bleached, slightly sunken patch on the side that's facing the most direct sun, that's sun scald, essentially a sunburn on the fruit. This usually happens after pruning removes too many leaves at once, suddenly exposing fruit that was previously shaded. The fix is simply being a little more conservative with pruning, especially during the hottest part of summer, and leaving enough foliage to shade the developing fruit. Yellowing leaves, and how to tell which cause you're dealing with. This is one of the trickiest things to diagnose because several different causes create yellow leaves, but the pattern and location tell you which one you're facing. If the lower, older leaves are yellowing first and the soil feels consistently wet when you check it, you're likely overwatering, and the roots are struggling for oxygen. If yellowing starts low and works upward gradually, while the soil moisture seems appropriate, that's often a nitrogen deficiency, since the plant pulls nitrogen from older leaves to support new growth elsewhere. If you see yellowing on just one side of the plant, or one branch at a time, while the rest looks fine, that one-sided pattern is a classic sign of Fusarium wilt, a soil-borne fungal disease that blocks the plant's water-conducting tissue. Unfortunately, there's no cure once a plant has it. The best move is removing the infected plant to prevent it from spreading to others and choosing resistant varieties next season. Many seed packets specifically advertise Fusarium resistance. If the yellowing comes with wilting that seems to recover somewhat at night but returns during the heat of the day, and you don't see a clear one-sided pattern, there could be Verticillium wilt instead, which behaves similarly to Fusarium but tends to progress more slowly. Leaf spot diseases, telling early blight, septoria, and bacterial spot apart. All three of these show up as spots on the leaves, and people often can't tell which one they are looking at. So here's the distinction that actually matters. Early blight produces larger spots, generally a quarter to a half inch, with a distinct pattern of concentric rings, almost like a target, often surrounded by a yellow halo. It usually starts on the lower, older leaves first, especially after humid or rainy stretches, and gradually works its way up the plant. Septoria leaf spot looks similar at a glance, but the spots are noticeably smaller and far more numerous, without that same strong ring pattern. A heavily infected leaf can look almost lace-like from how many tiny spots cover it. Bacterial spot behaves differently from both of these. It tends to show up in hot, wet conditions and spreads fast. And unlike the fungal diseases, you'll often see it on the fruit itself, not just the leaves, which is one of the clearest ways to distinguish it. For all three, the same basic response works. Remove and dispose of affected leaves promptly, Water at the base of the plant rather than overhead to avoid splashing spores onto healthy leaves. Mulch to prevent soil from splashing up during rain, and improve spacing and airflow between plants. If a fungal disease is confirmed and spreading, a fungicide labeled for edible plants can help. But prevention through airflow and proper watering matters far more than any product you can spray on after the fact. Late blight, the one to take seriously. This is the most destructive tomato disease, and it's worth knowing how to recognize it quickly because it can wipe out a plant in days under the right humid conditions. It starts with leaves that look almost water-soaked, as if they've been splashed with hot water, and those spots quickly enlarge into purple-tinted, oily-looking blotches. You may notice a faint gray-white fuzzy growth on the underside of affected leaves in humid weather. If you see this pattern, act immediately. Remove and destroy infected plant material. Don't compost it, and consider removing the entire plant if multiple areas are affected, since this disease spreads aggressively to nearby plants. This is the same general type of pathogen responsible for the Irish potato famine. And while a backyard tomato patch obviously isn't a national crisis, it explains why this particular disease is treated so seriously by gardeners and researchers alike. Powdery mildew. If you see a white, almost flour-like coating on the leaves, usually appearing later in the season when days are warm but nights turn cool, that's powdery mildew. Unlike most fungal tomato issues, it doesn't need rain or wet leaves to spread. It can infect in dry conditions too. Improve airflow. Remove the worst affected leaves and avoid excess nitrogen fertilizer, which tends to encourage the soft, lush growth this disease prefers. Blossom drop. This is when flowers form but fall off before ever producing fruit, with no pest or disease visible at all. The most common cause is simple temperature stress. Tomatoes struggle to set fruit when nighttime temperatures drop below 55 degrees or daytime temperatures climb above 95 degrees for extended periods. There's not much to do about extreme heat besides waiting it out. But for cooler spring weather, patience usually resolves this once temperatures stabilize. Poor fruit set despite heavy flowering. If your plant is covered in flowers but very little is actually turning into fruit, and temperature doesn't seem to be the issue, low pollinator activity could be the cause, especially if you're growing in a greenhouse, enclosed porch, or area with limited bee activity. Gently shaking the plant or its support structure for a few seconds every day or two during peak flowering helps release pollen and can noticeably improve fruit set. Pest damage. Aphids cluster on the undersides of leaves and on new growth, often leaving behind a sticky residue. A strong spray of water followed by insecticidal soap usually handles them within a few applications. Tomato hornworms are large, sometimes several inches long, and surprisingly easy to miss despite their size, since their green coloring blends in almost perfectly with the stems and leaves. Check your plants in the early morning or evening when they are most active and feeding, and simply remove them by hand. They do significant damage fast if left unchecked, sometimes stripping entire branches of leaves overnight. A general diagnostic habit worth building. Whenever something looks wrong, ask yourself 3 questions before assuming the worst. Where on the plant did it start? Top, bottom, or one side? How fast is it spreading? Over days or over weeks? And what's the weather been doing? Hot and dry, or humid and wet? Those 3 answers narrow down the list of likely causes faster than almost anything else, and they are exactly what an experienced gardener is unconsciously checking every time they look at a struggling plant. Knowing exactly when to pick a tomato makes a bigger difference in flavor than almost anything else in this whole process. A tomato is ready to harvest when it's reached its full color for that variety, deep red, or whatever the mature color is for the specific type you're growing, and gives slightly when you press it gently. It shouldn't feel rock hard, but it also shouldn't feel soft or mushy. Here's something worth knowing. A tomato that's fully colored but still slightly firm is actually better picked right away and allowed to finish ripening on a counter indoors, rather than left on the vine, especially as the weather cools toward the end of the season. The flavor compounds are mostly already developed by the time the color is full. Ripening the last little bit indoors doesn't meaningfully hurt the taste, and it protects the fruit from late-season pest damage or splitting from sudden rain. To harvest, hold the fruit gently and twist, or use a small pair of scissors or pruners to snip the stem just above the fruit. Pulling forcefully can damage the stem and the rest of the plant. Once you've picked your tomatoes, how you store them matters more than people realize. Never refrigerate a fresh, ripe tomato if you can help it. Cold temperatures break down the membranes inside the fruit, leaving you with a mealy, mushy texture and noticeably duller flavor. Tomatoes are best kept at room temperature, ideally stem side down, out of direct sunlight, where they'll keep well for several days. If you have more than you can eat in that window, that's exactly when a paste variety earns its keep. Cooked down into sauce and frozen or canned, the flavor holds up far better long-term than trying to refrigerate fresh fruit. As the growing season winds down and a frost is approaching, you can pick all remaining tomatoes, even fully green ones, and ripen them indoors in a paper bag or simply on a windowsill out of direct sun. They won't taste quite as good as vine-ripened summer tomatoes, but it's far better than losing the entire remaining harvest to frost overnight. That's the complete tomato journey, from choosing the right variety, starting it from seed indoors, all the way through transplanting, feeding, fixing the problems that come up along the way, and knowing exactly when to pick and how to store what you grow. If you follow this from start to finish, you should end the season with a genuinely strong harvest, not just a lot of green leaves and a handful of disappointing fruit. Next up, we're doing this exact same complete breakdown for peppers, and there's one specific step in starting pepper seeds that trips up almost everyone, because peppers need something tomatoes don't. If this helped, subscribe. We're covering one crop at a time, start to finish, all season long.